Focus.
Yeah, you guys have a good day. Make sure you get your thing. Thank you.
And there's just some donut crumbs if anybody wants.
Donut
crumbs.
Donut crumbs.
Thank you. I'll have to get some in a second. Have a good day. If anyone needs to use the bathroom or grab something to drink, we can take a couple minutes and then I'll get started. Or if nobody takes me up on it, then I'll get started.
Thank you.
You?
We need more. We need.
I'm gonna save this one. I have better handwriting.
Right? Oh my gosh.
We need 6 more.
Your private calligraphy teacher.
All right, well, I'm Jordan Peacock. I have a game company called Sortilege that has been doing private client stuff for a few years, and I'm working on has yet to be formally announced, or 3 RPG books, basically. I've also run home games for a while, and for the past year, I've been doing events here called B-Sides, which is basically one-shots of any game that is not D&D. Did some stuff at the Source in October. Jason ran the Dreading 2, which was a bunch of horror game one-shots and stuff like that, and I'm putting together plans for the next year, so I don't quite know what my event schedule will be there. However, just from a couple temperamental things, I generally don't like fantasy. I generally don't like hero journey stuff. That tends to be a bad fit with D&D. I played it a bunch, I've done a bunch of other things with it, but the stories that I've tended to tell and run have tended to veer away from a lot of the common tropes that you see with running heroic fantasy games. And what I've seen in particular has been that there's nothing wrong with those games, but sometimes if those are the only games that you're ever exposed to, that you ever play, that you ever run, it's actually sometimes hard to imagine how things could be otherwise. And one of the tropes that I see most commonly with this is the idea that your characters are either fated to be heroes, or by some chance chain of events end up becoming heroes, and they are the ones to solve the giant apocalyptic crisis and defeat the big bad evil guy. The whole BBEG thing, which was a term I hadn't even heard until relatively recently. That's the layout that a lot of campaigns do, and it's like people do it a lot because it works. Like there's a very, if you look into the hero's journey description stuff, like there's a very structured way that you can tell a story with that. What happens if your characters aren't heroes? What happens if there isn't, one big bad evil guy? There's a great quote, I want to say it's from Alan Moore, but basically it's the idea that a lot of people are attracted to conspiracy theories because it's comforting to say that this one person or this one group or whatever is like the cause of all ills, when really like life is a lot messier than that, and there's a lot of conflicting factors and things like that. So what I ended up coming around to in trying to articulate where I came from, and I wrote this down while you were writing because I was thinking, okay, so Nova does campaigns where characters are heroes. In my games, they're more likely to be contract lawyers and baristas. And that sounds like a great campaign. I want to be in it, honestly. But I came up with the term Zeitgeist campaigns as a way of trying to set expectations appropriately. And one of the analogies that I gave to a group of players was in a heroic fantasy World War II game, you guys maybe go in and you kill Hitler, right? Like, and you're the successful whatever. In a Zeitgeist game, it might be like, hey, you're running a pub in London during the bombings, and your goal is to continue operating as a pub and also like shelter the people who are living in your basement right now, and just trying to just navigate things. And some people, one of the initial concerns that'll come out of that is people will say, well, what if that's not exciting enough? Like, if I don't have the world-ending apocalypse, if I don't have like the archdevil that's coming in, or like the Cthulhu entity that's, invading from another dimension, like the stakes aren't high enough, there's not going to be that dramatic tension. The good news is that pretty much anything can have dramatic tension if your players have invested it with emotional energy. One of the most emotional moments I've been running an Invisible Sun game for over 3 years now, and there was a moment where they traveled, they met this being of change, and I told each of the players, like, basically your cost of passing through this entity's domain is you need to make a substantial change, and I gave them a lot of latitude for what that could be. And the barista in question in that campaign decided that it was time to look into other careers and handed in his work badge. And then after that whole scenario happened, he had to go back to his employer and break the news that I actually won't be working for you anymore. And before he did that, he talked to one of the other player characters and was like, so my current apartment is above the cafe and I may not have a place to live, so like while I'm figuring stuff out, can I stay on your couch? And just like the dynamic between them and the dynamic between him and the NPC cafe owner, it was just like a really poignant moment, because that job had been a center point for that character's emotional experience up until that point. And so giving that up had that emotional weight because the player had invested in it. Other players have also had jobs that have been kind of like throwaway, like, oh, by the way, this is a thing. And so for them, it wouldn't have carried the same weight. And so as you're creating a world with these things, a lot of drawing this emotional valence out comes from attending to, well, what do my players care about? And different players are going to care about very different things. You know, job in this case, it might be their family, it might be their reputation. You know, there's going to be different things that are the stakes that matter to those players, and to those players' characters. You're often kind of working on both levels, right? You have players that care about different types of gameplay, different things are going to be important to them. For some of them, having a certain style of experience is going to be more important than the particulars of what happened to their character. And then there's also, okay, well, this character has these stated goals, these stated objectives, etc. So you're kind of trying to navigate both of those at the same time, and you can tailor that. Also, I want to make this as much of a discussion as possible, so feel free to chime in, ask questions, whatever.
So, in most heroic journeys, it's their destiny. They have to go on that. But in this one, it's just something that just happens to them. Are you someone who very much is open to the idea of just writing characters out? If you're like, hey, you know what, my character, the stakes aren't worth the risk. Like, they want to back out. My character is leaving, and then they can introduce a new character. Are you open to the idea, or?
Oh, absolutely. I've handled this a few different ways, because in a long-running campaign, I do not have the same players that I started with. We did kind of a 1-year arc in that Invisible Sun campaign. That effectively was a complicated fetch quest. We got to the end of it, and 2 of the players were like, life is different. I would like to do other things. So one of their characters literally retired where they settled, got a house, now lives there. The other players can go visit them. They're now an NPC. And the other one went off somewhere, and we don't know where they went. I haven't had players continue in the game and just change out characters, but I'm totally open to that, and that's something that's very easily done. And really, the question to ask of the players is, what do you want to have happen with the character that you're abandoning? Do they die? Do they go away? Do we want to see them again and interact with them? And if we are seeing them again, how much editorial control do you want, or do I have kind of carry on in the spirit of the character as you've taken them, but I can just kind of run with them as an NPC? And any of those answers are fine as long as you and the player agree to them, right? Does that answer?
Yeah, I agree, because oftentimes I feel like I'm my character just doesn't agree with this.
Mm-hmm.
I personally feel bad making my character have to do something I know they don't agree with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's cool as long as you guys talk about what's the epilogue and how much do we want to see him again after that?
Yeah. Well, and I've also had, when March 2020 hit, one of my was one of my players, and it's like all of a sudden her work got crazy and she had to work from home and her kids were at home. She had 2 young kids. She's just like, look, I'm gonna tap out for the foreseeable future. And it's like, all right. And we engineered kind of she was supposed to accompany the party on this extended fetch quest, and instead it was like, you guys go on ahead, I'll catch up, and then she just mysteriously didn't catch up. And so there's this nice kind of latent mystery of, at any point in time, I'm like, you just tell me if you want to re-enter the story. I have some pretexts, and whichever one you want to run with, like we can just pretext and enter you back in. But I want this to complement your needs in life. I don't want this to be a burden or where you feel like, oh, I'm bad for missing sessions, or I just can't make things work. It's like, this is meant to serve the players and yourself. It should never be a burden or something where people are just.
Yeah, this is a game. This should and honestly needs to be a fun thing. Like I kind of mentioned, where it's like escapism, and it's like you can have dark escapism and have those moments, but like I think one big thing is like, if this becomes a burden, don't force yourself to come to sessions and whatnot. Like you can always come back. So
I think there's 2 sides to that though. There's also, don't tell me 10 minutes before the session that you're not going to show
communication,
up.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest things in any relationship, friendship, partnership, or coworkers. Communication is one of those really big things, and I think in today's society, unfortunately, we don't honestly while a lot of people put a lot of like stock on it, there's not a lot of ways that we understand how to. Have a good day.
See you, buddy.
On how to communicate with people directly and feel like we're not like being a burden on them. Because like I know for the longest time was like, I'm gonna make it work, and I can't make it work. And I tried my damnedest to make it work. And that's where I would be like 10 minutes beforehand, looks like I'm not able to actually make it. But that communication of me going, I might not make it. Understand that I'm working to try and be there, but there is a chance that I won't be. I think that's where those 2 sides of the coins have to meet, I think, specifically.
Sorry, I totally derailed. I just meant like, still being in the campaign, but just, changing out characters, because it's no longer a destiny, it's just hey, I'm doing this because I want to.
Yeah, well, and there's nothing, like, you're not making any given player character like this load-bearing column in your world, right? That doesn't mean that they're not important. It doesn't mean that they're not going to do things that like massively impact the world. And again, using that like World War II example, it's like you're not just having like an inert experience. Things are happening around you that you can kind of